As a 6-year-old, I watched Jack Ruby shoot Lee Oswald live on television. Even to a 6-year-old, it seemed Ruby committed the murder to stop Oswald from talking. There were a lot of panicked people the weekend Kennedy was murdered. The conspirators almost certainly had planned for Oswald to be killed either in the Texas School Book Depository or in the Texas Theater. That didn't happen. Oswald realized he was a patsy and could be expected to eventually reveal his associations and employment with both the CIA and FBI, and certainly his participation in the fake defector program to Russia would be detailed. The misdeeds of some very powerful people were gravely at risk of being exposed that weekend. Ruby was a longtime organized crime associate and gun runner to Cuba, and he was everywhere the weekend of November 22nd. Julie Ann Mercer will identify a picture of Ruby on Saturday, the day before Oswald was shot, as the man she saw driving a truck dropping off 2 men with a rifle by the grassy knoll about an hour before the assassination. The Warren Commission will blatantly misrepresent Mercer's testimony, including the description of the truck she described. Ruby will be at Parkland Hospital, talking to National Scripps Howard reporter Seth Cantor shortly after Kennedy and Connolly arrived.
Just after I entered, there was a group of nurses and doctors standing around with a lot of concern, and Jack Ruby came up to me. He said something to the effect that, "Isn't this just terrible?" And he looked as if he was extremely distressed. I shook hands with him, and I had known him previously. And Ruby asked me what I thought about his closing his places of business for a day or two out of concern for what had happened. And I told him I thought that was a good idea and to please excuse me, I had to go on. I guess that encounter with Ruby took maybe 25, 30 seconds. It was very clear to me who I had talked to and who I had called by name and who had called me by name and who I had shaken hands with and everything. But when the Warren Commission report came out, they said that probably under the stress of everything that was going on, that I most likely was confused and that I talked to Ruby at the police station several hours later. I was dismayed when I picked up my copy of the Warren Commission report and discovered what they had decided about my testimony. And among other things, I immediately began to wonder, who else they had talked to, who they chose not to believe, and why.
Ruby was seen trying to enter the room where Oswald was being questioned in Dallas Police Headquarters. He will be seen in the hallways multiple times, and Ruby will be photographed standing with reporters at Henry Wade's famous midnight news conference, and even corrected Wade when he was trying to remember the Fair Play for Cuba committee. Ruby will then make call after call to police and FBI officials warning of the plot to shoot Oswald during the transfer the next morning.
I thought I recognized the voice, but at the same time I could not put a face or a name with the voice. And as we talked, he began telling me that we needed to change the plans on moving Oswald from the basement, that he knew of the plans to make the move, and if we did not make a change, the statement he made precisely was, "We are going to kill him." No sooner than I turned it on and they were telling that Jack Ruby had killed Oswald, then I suddenly realized, knowing Jack Ruby the way I did, this was the man I was talking to on the phone last night. At that time, I put the voice with the face, and I knew within myself that Jack Ruby is the one that made that call to me the night before. And I think it was obvious because he knew me and I knew him, and he called me by name over the telephone. And seeing this and knowing what I knew and what he had said, then to me it had to be Jack Ruby. He made the statement, "We are going to kill him," which leads me to believe that this was not a spontaneous thing that happened on the spur of the moment. He was watching Oswald coming out the door and all of a sudden he decided to shoot him. I do not believe that. I think this was a planned event with him being the man to do the shooting.
One question, Mr. Shanklin. You said you were taking a shower on Saturday night and you got a phone call from someone telling you that they were going to try and kill Lee Harvey Oswald. Could you tell me who that phone call was from?
The office got the call. I'd gone home at about 11 and I was trying to take a shower, and this is the first time I'd had any chance. This Saturday.
Right.
I came on back down because they couldn't get the police chief. And I came on back, and then I finally got in touch with the deputy chief, and I said I want to talk to Chief Curry. And finally, at about 8 o'clock the next morning, they got him. And I told him that I wanted to report this directly to him. And he said, well, he had everything taken care of. He had 2 armored trucks.
You were never able to determine who the call had come from?
No,
it
was an anonymous call. It came into the clerk that was operating the switchboard. The same call I later found out, or probably the same individual, called the sheriff's office.
Ruby had obviously been given orders to kill Oswald, and he did not want to do it. The Warren Commission will state that Ruby came down the main rampway to the basement no more than 3 minutes before shooting Oswald. That was denied by at least 10 eyewitnesses. Most likely he was admitted by a back stairwell, assisted by at least 1 Dallas police officer.
What many people do not know, even those who are familiar with most of the facts of the JFK case, is that there were 2 plots to kill President Kennedy in November of 1963. The first one was 3 weeks earlier in Chicago. Kennedy was supposed to arrive at O'Hare Airport on Saturday, November 2nd at 11:40 a.m. He was to attend the Army Air Force football game at Soldier Field. But on Wednesday, October 30th, the FBI told the Secret Service in Chicago that a plot was afoot to kill Kennedy there.
There were actually 2 tips that reached the Secret Service in the week before JFK's trip here to Chicago, and we'll soon see that the 2 were interrelated. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover reported the first tip. Hoover's information was that at least 1 hit team with high-powered rifles would attempt to shoot the president from a warehouse or office building overlooking the president's motorcade route that coming Saturday. An FBI informant named Lee provided the information. And yes, the Lee providing the tip and probably saving JFK's life that weekend may well have been Lee Harvey Oswald. A break in the case came on Thursday, October 31st, 2 days before the president's arrival at O'Hare. A landlady at a rooming house here in the vicinity of Clark and Division Streets reported that she oversaw 4 rifles with scopes and a map of the president's motorcade route in one of the rooms she had rented to 4 dark-complected men. Chicago's Secret Service initiated 24-hour surveillance, but an agent named J. Lloyd Stocks blew his cover in an alley behind the rooming house the following evening on Friday and had to take 2 of the men into immediate custody. Stocks questioned one of the suspects all night, while fellow Secret Service agent Robert Motto separately questioned the other man. By morning, neither agent had gotten his man to reveal anything, and Kennedy's plane was due at O'Hare in just a couple of hours. The second tip involved a man reported spouting anti-Kennedy rhetoric and known to have owned multiple firearms. There were some amazing similarities between this man and the man who would be arrested for JFK's murder 3 weeks later.
The planned patsy in Chicago was to be played by a man with a similar profile as Lee Harvey Oswald. His name was Thomas Valet. The Secret Service was tailing him also, since the word was out that he had made violent threats against Kennedy. Consider the parallels between Oswald and Valet. Like Oswald, Valet was a former Marine who was stationed at a U-2 base in Japan. Like Oswald, The cover unit for Vallee's probable CIA recruitment was something called Joint Technical Advisory Group. Vallee had spoken bitterly of JFK and Cuba. He said, "We lost a lot of good men at the Bay of Pigs." Vallee had both rifles and ammunition in his apartment, since he had trained anti-Castro Cubans in Long Island, so the police trailed him. They pulled him over just a couple of hours before Kennedy was to arrive at O'Hare. It turned out that, like Oswald in Dallas, Vallee had a job in a warehouse along the president's motorcade route.
Today, condominiums, 625 West Jackson Street, was a warehouse in 1963. Thomas Vallee had been given a job at the IPP Lithoplate Company, a printer on the 3rd floor. Kennedy's limousine was scheduled to make a slow turn from the Northwest Expressway onto the Jackson Street exit and go right by Vallee's 3rd floor window. Back in Chicago that Saturday morning, November 2nd, 1963, crowds had started to line the streets in preparation for President Kennedy's visit. The press plane had taken off from Washington, but at least 2 shooters remained at large, and Kennedy's advisors convinced him to cancel his trip. And finally, the arrest of Thomas Arthur Vallee is made. Vallee's arrest was made by 2 CIA-connected Chicago police officers, that is, officers who either worked nearly exclusively for the CIA or took extensive CIA training away from their normal jobs. Officers Daniel Groth and Peter Sherla had watched Vallee all night, but only arrested him at 9:10 a.m., 2.5 hours before the president was due in Chicago and after the trip was officially canceled. The impression given is that the purpose of the 2 intelligence-connected officers may not have been to restrain Vallee, but instead to shadow him until after the president had been shot. When Chicago Secret Service agent Abraham Bolden tried to contact the Warren Commission several months later with information about the Chicago plot, he was arrested on false charges. Bolden was placed in jail, keeping him from telling what he knew about the Chicago plot to the public and the Warren Commission. Not one word about the Chicago plot appears in the Warren Commission report. Thanks to many researchers, and especially Dr. Gary Aguilar and Hosea Thompson, following the CE-399 trail is shocking in what it reveals not only about the bullet, but also about the Warren Commission. To believe the single bullet theory, you must believe that Lee Harvey Oswald fired a Mannlicher Carcano rifle from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository at President Kennedy. With a single shot, the 6.5mm bullet supposedly pierced Kennedy's suit coat from the rear before puncturing his body to the right of his spine. The bullet exited Kennedy's body through the front of his neck below his Adam's apple. The bullet then punctured Connally's back, shattering his 5th right rib bone. After exiting the front of Connally's chest, the bullet shot through his right wrist, breaking one of the wrist bones, before burying itself beneath the skin of Connally's left leg. Then this incredibly destructive bullet would miraculously be found in almost pristine condition near an elevator in Parkland Hospital. This is the bullet that supposedly did all the damage. Let's start with a chronology of how and where CE-399 was found. Parkland Hospital senior engineer Mr. Darrell C. Tomlinson was moving some wheeled stretchers when he bumped one of the stretchers against a wall and a bullet rolled out. He called for help and was joined by Mr. O.P. Wright, Parkland's personnel director. They examined the bullet together. Now this is important. Both men will never, from this moment on, ever testify or describe the bullet they found that day as being CE-399. Let me say that again. In every interview and statement either of the men will make for the rest of their lives, They will state that CE-399 is not the bullet they found that day. They both will state repeatedly that the bullet they found that day had a pointed tip and was definitely not CE-399. Wait, didn't the Warren Commission present a report by Secret Service Special Agent Bardwell Odom, Commission Exhibit number 2011, stating that he, Odom, showed CE-399 to Tomlinson and Wright on June 24th, 1964, and that they agreed it looked like the bullet they found? No, he did not. Let me repeat. Odom did not write that report. In his own words to Dr. Aguilar and Hosea Thompson, I didn't show it to anybody at Parkland. I didn't have any bullet. I don't think I ever saw it even. Odom said that he never had any bullet related to the Kennedy assassination in his possession, whether during the FBI's investigation in 1964 or at any other time. Asked whether he might have forgotten the episode, Mr. Odom remarked that he would never have forgotten investigating so important a piece of evidence, but even if he had done the work and later forgotten about it, he said he certainly would have turned in a 302 report covering something that important, and no 302 report exists. But there is even better proof. That's the testimony of Darrell C. Tomlinson before the Warren Commission. It was taken on March 20th, 1964, right at Parkland Hospital by our friend Arlen Specter. And remember, Tomlinson is the man who found the bullet. There was only one question that needed to be asked that day of Tomlinson. It was obvious to everyone. That question is CE-399 the bullet that you found that day here at Parkland Hospital? Incredibly, Specter never asked Tomlinson that question. As a matter of fact, he asked Tomlinson no questions about any aspect of the bullet. He didn't ask one question about the bullet Tomlinson found, including if CE-399 was that bullet. He couldn't ask because he knew the answer would be no. As you can see, there's 5 pages of Warren Commission questioning of Tomlinson by Specter, and all Specter asks about is the position and location of the stretchers and maybe where the bullet was found. Even in that testimony, Tomlinson kept saying that he couldn't be sure where the bullet came from or even which stretcher it really came off of. This failure of Arlen Specter to ask the only obvious question, is CE-399 the bullet you found that day? It's some of the best evidence that the Warren Commission investigation was a total sham. Let's go back to Parkland Hospital now in 1963. After examining the bullet together, Tomlinson and Wright passed it along to one of the U.S. Secret Service agents who were in the hospital, Secret Service Special Agent Richard Johnson. Johnson then carried the bullet back to Washington, D.C. and handed it to James Rowley, the chief of the Secret Service. Rowley, in turn, gave the bullet to FBI agent Elmer Lee Todd, who carried it to Agent Robert Frazier in the FBI's crime lab. All right, so after Tomlinson and Wright find the bullet, they turn it directly over to Secret Service agent Richard Johnson, and he turned it over to Secret Service Chief James Rowley. Guess what? Both of these men also state that the bullet they received that day was not CE-399. But the Warren Commission couldn't cover up this as easily with a fake report. Let's go back and look at that Warren Commission report number 2011. CE-2011 reported about Secret Service agents Johnson and Rowley. A memo from the FBI's Dallas field office dated 6/24/64 reported that On June 24, Special Agent Richard E. Johnson and James Rowley, Chief, advised Special Agent Elmer Lee Todd, Washington Field Office, that they were unable to identify rifle bullet C1, which is number 399, which before the Warren Commission had logged it in as 399, was called C1 by inspection. So on June 24, 1964, FBI agent Todd, who received the bullet from Rowley, the head of the Secret Service, returned with a bullet to get Secret Service agents Johnson and Rowley to identify it. Commission Exhibit 2011 reports that both Johnson and Rowley advised Todd that they could not identify this bullet as the one they saw on the day of the assassination. Commission Exhibit 2011 contains no comment about the failure. What does all this mean? It means that someone wrote a fake report from Secret Service agent Bardwell Odom stating that Tomlinson and Wright identified CE-399 when clearly they did just the opposite, saying no way was CE-399 the bullet they found. It also means that the next two people to receive the bullet found at Parkland, Special Agent Richard Johnson and Secret Service Chief James Rowley, also refused to identify CE-399 as the bullet they handled and turned over to the FBI. It means that U.S. intelligence services not only knew in advance of the assassination attempt and may have participated, but that U.S. intelligence services actively participated in the cover-up. Documents still illegally not being shown to the American public may well prove this intelligence service complicity. Right after the shots rang out in Dealey Plaza, many people thought at least one or more of those shots came from behind the fence on the grassy knoll. Some saw a puff of gun smoke, and some who ran up the knoll smelled gunpowder. Dallas police officer Joe Marshall Smith wasn't sure where the shots came from, but he immediately had a woman tugging on his arm, saying that they are shooting the president from the bushes on the knoll. Officer Smith ran up the small hill, past the fence, and into the parking lot by the railroad yards. Smith had his gun drawn and pointed it at a man there. The man pulled out Secret Service credentials from his hip pocket, which Officer Smith recognized as being real, and so continued on. As confirmed by the Warren Commission, there were no real Secret Service agents in Dealey Plaza at that time. They were all in the motorcade and headed to Parkland Hospital with the president. Officer Smith will later recount that the credentials looked real, but the man he encountered didn't look like a Secret Service agent. He had on a sports shirt and had dirty hands, looking more like an auto mechanic. Deputy Constable Seymour Weitzman and others will report being stopped by men with Secret Service credentials, both in the grassy knoll area and by the Texas School Book Depository. Deputy Weissman reported to the Warren Commission that he met up with Secret Service agents behind the wall that adjoined the stockade fence and said he turned over to one of the Secret Service men what he believed to be a portion of the president's skull that he had found on Elm Street. Gordon Arnold was an infantryman on leave in Dallas. He reports being asked to move twice when setting up to film the motorcade from the grassy knoll. Immediately after a shot rang out and whizzed by his left ear, Arnold dropped to the ground. Immediately, two men dressed as policemen approached. One kicked him and demanded his camera. Arnold refused, as it was his mother's camera, and one of the policemen pulled out the film and threw the camera back at Arnold. Witness Jean Hill ran behind the fence and was stopped by men claiming to be Secret Service, who reached into her coat pocket and took photos she was holding for her friend Mary Mormon. Ed Hoffman was a deaf mute standing on the side of the freeway. For 45 minutes before the assassination, Hoffman watched two men behind the stockade fence at the top of the grassy knoll.
I saw a man standing here, wearing a black hat and a blue jacket. I saw a puff of smoke and I thought it was a cigarette, but it wasn't. He had a gun and he walked towards the railroad. He tossed the gun to the second man. Then he turned and straightened his jacket, adjusted his hat, and walked casually away. The man with the striped shirt, the railroad shirt, walked over to the electrical box with the gun. He took the gun apart. He put it in a toolbox. He then walked slowly away in the direction of the railroad track.
Hoffman then saw a police officer come quickly around the fence and confronted the suit man. The suit man held out his empty hands and pulled ID from his coat pocket to show the officer. That officer was almost certainly Joe Marshall Smith. It is clear that the assassins controlled the crime scene by placing fake Secret Service agents and fake policemen behind the knoll and in the area of the school book depository.